Fanfic Corner, presented by Animal Girl. Love Beneath the Moon, Chapter 1, Peace Talks, written and read by Animal Girl. It had been a month since Rayla, Callum, and Ezren had returned Zym to his mother and averted all-out war between Xadia and Katolis. Now all that was left was to negotiate a peace treaty. The elves were coming to Katolis to discuss the treaty, and Callum and Ezren could hardly wait. They had received a message arrow from Ruan, stating that he and Rayla would be among the elves coming to the castle. "They're almost here," Ezra said excitedly. He and Callum were in the tallest tower of the castle and had just spotted the delegation party from Xadia. Callum stood next to his half-brother. He was just as excited about the elves' arrival as Ezren was. He was just better at hiding it. After a month, they were going to be reunited with Rayla. The three had become good friends during their journey to return Zym to his mother. But Rayla and Callum's relationship was vastly different from Rayla and Ezren's. Callum and Rayla had fallen in love, and Callum had asked Rayla to marry him when the peace talks were officially made. Or when peace was officially made, excuse me. Both princes made their way down to the throne room. Like Rayla, they wouldn't be taking part in the peace talks. Rayla had simply come at Ruan's insistence so that she could spend some time with her two friends. However, they were expected to be there to greet the delegates. Elves from each of the 6 regions within Xadia were there, as well as representatives and nobles from each of the 5 kingdoms. As soon as the formalities were over, Callum, Rayla, and Ezren were excused until dinner. The 2 princes read Rayla to the room that she would be using during the peace talks. Unlike the rest of the delegates from Xadia, Rayla wasn't staying in the guest wing. Her room was right across from the prince's room. While the servants had done up the rooms in the guest wing, Callum and Ezra had made up Rayla's room themselves. The sheets, comforter, and drapes were white with purple accents, and the furniture was made of light wood. The wardrobe was filled with dresses, gowns, and other clothes, and a gilded, full-length mirror stood nearby, while white lilies and purple vases were on every flat surface. "It's beautiful," Rayla said, looking around the room. "We decorated ourselves, just for you," Ezren said. "Our room is right across the hall." A tea table stood near the middle of the room and was set up for tea for 3, with a plate of 12 jelly tarts. Grape, strawberry, persimmon, and a new flavor the baker was trying out for the Xadian delegates, moonberry. The 3 friends had tea and caught each other up on the events of the past month. Rayla told Callum and Ezren that she had visited Zym and his mother shortly before leaving for Katolis, and that the Dragon Prince was doing fine, while the princes told Rayla that they had had Varden's secret chambers and everything in it destroyed, and the few creatures he was holding, both magical and non-magical, were set free. All too soon it was time to get ready for the welcome banquet. Ezren and Callum left Rayla so she could get cleaned up and change into one of the gowns that they had commissioned the royal seamstress to make for her. It had been a difficult task, since neither prince knew Rayla's measurements, but the seamstress's assistant looked to be roughly the same size, so she had been a stand-in for the fittings. The seamstress had told them that, if something wasn't right with anything, to send word, and either she or her assistant would come and make any last-minute adjustments that were needed. "Are you ready, Rayla?" Ezren asked, from where he and Callum waited outside her door. Rayla came out of her room wearing a sleeveless teal gown with a flowing skirt and a beaded top. Her snow-white hair was curled and worn down with a beaded headband just in front of her horns, and she had on silver and opal jewelry and a pair of silver kitten heels. She had also put on some makeup and perfume that was on the makeup table in her room. "You look real pretty," Ezren said. Callum didn't say anything, just blushed slightly when he looked at Rayla. Both princes were dressed in their best suits and crowns, and even Bate looked somewhat presentable. Ezren was bringing the glow-toad with him, but Callum had told Rayla earlier that Ezren would more than likely be excused after dinner, since he was only 11. The friends entered the banquet hall. Everyone else was already there, all dressed in their best clothes, and talking amongst themselves. Mostly, it was the humans talking to the humans, and the elves talking to the elves. But they did see Ruan and Lujan talking with General Amaya and Commander Gren, like they were old friends. Claudia and Soren were also talking with the 4 adults. But it was clear that the siblings were slightly uncomfortable talking with Ruan and Lujan because of the guilt they felt over what their father did. Dinner was served and everyone took their seats. It was all assigned seating to ensure that all the delegates would be able to talk through dinner and that the humans and elves couldn't stick to their own. Fortunately, Rayla was sitting between Callum and Ezren. This would make it easier for the 3 friends to talk. Soren was sitting next to a Moonshadow assassin, while Claudia was next to a Moon Mage. Ruan and Lujan were sitting with General Amaya and Commander Gren, with Commander Gren sitting next to General Amaya so he could translate for her. Dinner consisted of dishes from each of the 5 kingdoms, as well as delicacies from Xadia. Rayla was eager to try some of the food her friends had grown up with, as well as her favorites from Xadia, while Callum and Ezra were equally eager to try Rayla's favorites from Xadia, as well as their own favorite dishes. The 3 friends also noted that they were the only ones that had not been served wine. They had been served moonberry juice instead of wine. However, they didn't care. They laughed and talked throughout the meal, unaware of how the grown-ups felt uncomfortable. Here they were, adults, and 3 children were getting along better than they were. They were going to have to take a lesson from them to put their differences aside if the peace talks were going to be successful. The next morning, Rayla woke early and hurried down to the kitchen to meet Callum and Ezra for breakfast. The peace talks were scheduled to start that day, and the 3 friends planned to spend the day together. After breakfast, Callum and Ezra took Rayla to the stables for a surprise. Callum made Rayla turn around before he went to get her surprise. "Don't let her look until I say, Ezren," Callum said. "I won't," Ezren answered. "So just what is this surprise?" Rayla asked. "You'll see." "Okay, Rayla," Callum said. "You can turn around." Rayla turned to find Callum holding the reins of the most beautiful mare she had ever seen. She had big brown eyes and a mane, tail, and coat as white as Rayla's hair. Rayla went up to the horse and stroked her neck. "She's beautiful," Rayla said. "She's yours," Ezren said, coming up to the 2 teens. "What's her name?" Rayla asked, not taking her eyes off her horse. "Moonglow," Callum answered. "Do you want to go for a ride?" Rayla smiled and nodded. Moonglow was already saddled, and a groom brought out Callum's stallion, Stormbringer, and Ezren's colt, Lightning. Stormbringer was a handsome brown steed, an Arabian like Moonglow, and Lightning was a jet black Tennessee Walker. As the 3 friends rode off, they passed Soren, who was sparring with his new friend from the welcome banquet. Claudia and her new friend from the banquet were in the library trading spells. Meanwhile, the delegates were deep in discussion. The talks were going well, and a lot of ground had been covered. However, the Xadian delegates had one final thing to discuss before the talks concluded for the day. The head of the Xadian delegates rose and shuffled some papers. "Before we conclude the session," he said, "there is one last thing we must discuss. Many back in Xadia have concerns about this alliance, so it has been decided that, to ensure peace, there should be a union between an elf and a human noble. We will let General Amaya and Commander Gren select the human's representative, while Ruran and Lujan will choose a suitable elf." After returning from their ride, and a picnic lunch the servants had packed for them. Rayla, Callum, and Ezren brushed, stabled, and fed Moonglow, Stormbringer, and Lightning. Once the horses were tended to, they still had a good hour before dinner. Ezren went off to play with bait, while Callum took Rayla to the gardens. There was a spot that no one really went to that was the perfect place to go to be alone. However, Callum and Rayla weren't the only ones in the garden. We had no idea they were going to suggest that, Ruan said. Marriage is sometimes used to seal a treaty between tribes back in Xadia, but for the other delegates to even think about using it in this instance? As Ruan said, we had no idea, Zym said. It doesn't matter now, Commander Greer translated for General Amaya. We need to think of who we will suggest for this marriage to the others tomorrow. However, they couldn't think of anyone. None of the nobles that had come to the peace talks would be willing to marry a complete stranger, unless there was something in it for them. And many of the elves didn't know that much about the proper social protocols within the human courts. They were just about to give up hope when a noise drew their attention. Following it, they discovered Callum and Rayla. Completely unaware that they had been discovered, the two teens were sitting on one of the stone benches, kissing. I think we just found who we to suggest to the others, Zym said. Dinner that night wasn't as formal as the one the previous night. After getting cleaned up, the friends changed into slightly more appropriate clothes before making their way down to the dining room. They had hoped that, like breakfast and lunch, it would just be the three of them. But the adults had made it clear before the peace talks even started that everyone would have dinner together. Unlike last night's dinner, there was a lot less tension among everyone. A day spent together had led to common ground having been found and friendships having been formed. Elves and humans were talking to each other as if they were old friends and freely mixing amongst each other. After dinner, dessert was served, followed by some entertainment. A small group of elves told stories of mages and warriors from long before the Divide. It was very late by the time the stories were done. Ezren had gone off to bed, and everyone else was talking and circulating. Ruan, Zym, General Amaya, and Commander Gren found Callum and Rayla out on the balcony, talking and taking in the night air. Can we talk to the two of you for a moment? Ruan said. Callum and Rayla looked at each other, trying to figure out what they did to get into trouble. The delegates from Xadia have made a request to ensure the alliance, Zym said. They're proposing a marriage between an elf and a human noble. You two get along so well, and you're the ones that put an end to the war before it even began. We were hoping you would agree to it. We can agree to the delegates' terms, but there's something you should know, Callum said. We're already engaged, Rayla said. Okay, now, if I mispronounced any of the names, particularly with the elves, I apologize. Some of them are hard to pronounce, particularly the one elf, Zym, I think was her name, because I only heard it like once. Second, I also apologize for my very, very bad attempt to replicate Rayla's Scottish accent. I know it's not good, so you don't need to comment on that. Okay, before I sign off, one thing I'd like to touch on. If any of you out there have a fanfic or even a short story that you'd like me to read for Fanfic Corner, feel free to send it to me at either my Tumblr account or my Facebook page, I will have the link in the description section. A couple of things to keep in mind, though. First off, please make sure to include your name or the name of the author with their permission within the fanfic, either at the top or at the bottom. No fanfic will be read if I can't credit the author. Okay? Secondly, keep in mind that if it's long, I will be dividing it up into videos. I do like to keep these readings under an hour, mostly because my camcorder stops recording after 33 minutes. I mean, it keeps recording, but it kicks over to another video. Thirdly, I'm not going to tell anybody how to do their writing, but please try to keep it clean. I will gloss over any words or parts I deem inappropriate, but if there are way too many, I just won't do a reading. Lastly, be honest, please. If I learn that a fanfic or a short story was submitted by someone without the author's approval, I will not only remove the video from my channel, but I will also not accept fanfics or short stories from that sender anymore.